Hey y'all, I just beat Saros and here's what I think about it. In this video, I'll be talking about the story, gameplay, and accessibility. Quick note about spoilers, I won't be mentioning any major story spoilers, however, I will be mentioning a few plot details, such as the game's basic setup. Despite this, I'm confident you can watch this video before playing the game. Hard video games scare me, and Returnal was no exception to that. I had been putting off playing Returnal for years because I honestly just assumed that I wouldn't be able to beat it or would just get frustrated and quit before I could. I finally did end up playing Returnal, however, back in February in preparation for Saros. Surprisingly, I actually had a really great time despite not liking hard games or having never played a roguelike before. Although that doesn't mean I didn't have some issues with it. Returnal is an incredibly fun game, but I think it has some real core elements that I just personally didn't love. The story was purposely vague, which made me uninvested in the plot. The game also featured almost no permanent progression, which meant that the only factor on if you could beat the game or not was skill. These things kind of came together to create a real inaccessible experience for players, pushing more people away than anything else, which is a shame for a game as fun as Returnal. Right from the start, Saros was marketed as being much more accessible than Returnal. Modular difficulty, more serious progression, and an increased emphasis on story were all mentioned, and they all happen to be my biggest issues with Returnal. I was a bit worried, however, that Saros would go too far with its changes, losing some of the best elements from Returnal. Thankfully, that wasn't the case at all. Saros makes all the right changes to make a much more accessible experience for everyone, while still keeping what made Returnal so great in the first place. The story was one of my biggest issues in Returnal. I thought the story had a lot of good ideas, but unfortunately, I found that it didn't land the execution. See, Returnal's story is broken into two halves. In the first half, you were following a mysterious signal, and in the second half, you were just trying to escape or something. It really lost me by then, and unfortunately, the many audio logs didn't fill in much for me either. So much about this world goes intentionally unsolved, and I would have loved a more traditional story to keep me invested in the story the entire game, rather than mostly just loving the gameplay. Saros makes it a goal to fix this issue, and I'd say that it is able to improve a lot from Returnal. Saros focuses on Arjun, who is a part of a team sent to a distant world trying to find three different groups of colonists. Arjun is specifically looking for his partner Nitya, who was sent out in the first group. The planet is seemingly turning people who look at the sun slowly crazy, however, and Arjun has to find Nitya before it's too late. I actually think this is a really engaging idea for a story, especially with a few details that I won't spoil. The planet of Carcosa visually looks fantastic and is a great backdrop to the story. The art direction is amazing, with huge dark fantasy looking structures all over the world. The first half of the game tasks you with getting to a city, and from the first area, the city can actually be seen in the skybox, moving ever closer as you move through the game. Unlike Returnal, I think this game feels a lot more connected. Returnal very clearly felt like two halves to me, but here this feels like one realistic, interconnected world to explore. It really helped me get a lot more immersed in this world and want to learn a lot more about it. The visuals are some of the best aspects of this game and really draw you into wanting to explore this world to its fullest. Similarly to Returnal though, I think Saros could have done a better job at explaining some of the lore of this planet. While Saros does flesh out the natives of the planet much more, I still think it could have gone further here, especially when it comes to the game's central antagonist. The race of creatures inhabiting the planet are constantly mentioned, yet are still left intentionally vague. Much of the details are left up to player interpretation rather than being fully explained. Saros also tells its story in a very similar way to Returnal, with the only real difference being how much emphasis it puts on it. In Returnal, the story was more so in the background and something you could piece together if you want to, while here it's much more in your face. Saros will constantly have you talking to someone on the radio, reading audio or text logs, or even talking to others face to face. You can even find people in the world during runs and talk to them multiple times. Despite all this, I think Saros needs to do even more to keep the player engaged in the central plot. The player is constantly told things that relate to the events, but don't actually continue the story much. All the player knows for the first half is that everyone's going crazy, you need to find Nitya, and she may be in the city. Even though Saros has a lot more dialogue and character interactions than Returnal, these moments don't usually do much to actually move the story forward. Lots of conversations will give you more details about the world or characters, but they rarely add anything substantial to the game's goal or central plot. Because of this, the story feels more like something happening in the background rather than something you're actively engaged in the whole time. Saros is honestly more of a character-driven story than anything. You can talk to the rest of your crew in the hub area each time you return, multiple times, and they each have multiple lines of dialogue. Each character has their own reason for coming to Carcosa and giving their life to their company, yet most of it is told in audio and text logs. It's hard to build a connection with these characters despite being able to interact with them plenty, because the game simply doesn't let you do so beyond mostly logs. The biggest issue with the character side of the game are the facial animations. The character interactions happen in-game, and because of that, cannot use pre-rendered facial animations. What's here instead are genuinely terrible looking flat faces that give off almost no emotion at all. They can really ruin a lot of emotional scenes because the characters' faces do not match their voice performances at all. I think this is part of what makes it so hard to make a connection with these characters, because a lot of the time when you're directly talking to them, they just don't feel like real characters. The biggest improvement in Saros' storytelling, however, is how it tells a story in a roguelike. It's hard to have a linear story in a randomly generated game, yet Saros is able to do so by making a few key changes from Returnal. First, some elements of the world are not randomly generated and will appear no matter what. This way, places that are important to the story will be able to show up multiple times throughout your runs. The biggest change, however, is how it gets the player to actually engage with the story. In Returnal, I was only able to go through each biome once, which I will get into later, and because of this, I missed tons of audio logs and story details. Here in Saros, however, the game will let you return to the hub area after each biome, regardless if you die or not. By doing this, it lets the player experience content that they would have missed otherwise. This was the biggest issue from Returnal, and I'm glad that they directly addressed it here. Saros tries to put much more emphasis on its story, with more cutscenes, characters, and dialogue, yet it also tries to keep Returnal's vague storytelling and personal interpretations. These two sides are at odds and just don't come together well in the end for me. Despite that, I still think there's a lot to get out of this story. The fantastic art direction creates a world that I wanted to get lost in and fully explore. The improvements to roguelike storytelling are also very much welcome and a big improvement. What's here just might be enough for many people, as the ideas and world itself are extremely strong. I just wish that the next game would have an engaging plot thread to go along with that. Something that I could get invested in and engaged in other than just the gameplay. The gameplay is still the best part about Saros. The devs took what worked so well in Returnal and elevated it even more so here. Saros is still a game with a ton of projectiles to dodge and enemies to kill and movement abilities to utilize. Everything great about Returnal is exactly the same here, with even some of the same mechanics like adrenaline levels and shielded enemies broken by melee. What makes Saros so special is how the devs were perfectly able to add on to Returnal's combat, making it perfectly fit in the combat loop without even removing anything. The biggest change here in Saros are the different orb colors. From what I remember, Returnal did have different orb colors, but differentiating between them wasn't a key element of combat. Here in Saros, however, that's one of the most important parts. Saros has three different types of orbs: red, yellow, and blue. Each of these three different orbs adds some kind of new mechanic to the game, deepening the overall combat loop and increasing player engagement. Blue orbs are probably the most common and can be deflected via the new shield ability. When I first started playing, I was confused as to why I should go through the effort of intentionally going in the way of blue orbs and bringing my shield up when I could just as easily dodge through them. What's so smart about these blue orbs, however, and what took me a bit to realize, was that they actually directly relate to your combat abilities. When deflecting a blue orb with your shield, they actually charge your heavy weapon, which is new to this game. This is the reason why you should run into them, because if you do, then you have an opportunity to kill an enemy faster, but also a higher chance at taking damage. It's a small change, but it adds an element of risk and reward to the game that I really like. Yellow orbs show up mostly during the eclipse and will cause corruption when they hit you. Corruption will deplete your maximum amount of health on top of causing damage. The really smart thing about the yellow orbs, though, is how they interact with the blue orbs. The only way to get rid of corruption is by using your power weapon, which can in turn best be charged by collecting blue orbs. It once again causes a really great risk and reward effect where you can risk trying to collect blue orbs to remove corruption, but it also puts the player in more danger. On top of this, yellow orbs can also be deflected with the shield, but will still cause corruption. This is another decision players will have to make on if they want to safely deflect the yellow orbs and cause corruption, or risk dashing through them and not getting any. The red orbs also add a risk and reward element to player choice. Red orbs cannot be dashed through and will quickly break the shield if deflected by it. I think these red orbs are a fantastic idea because they do a great job at removing the crutch that is the dash ability. Red orbs are not overused in my opinion and are always paired with a yellow or blue orb, meaning that you can always dodge through most bullet patterns including them, just only in specific spots. Red orbs can also be parried, which will not only stun enemies, but also get rid of all the remaining orbs coming your way. It's a great choice that players must make if they want to attempt to get a moment of safety, while also getting directly in the way of the most dangerous orbs in the game. These three orbs all come together in a really fantastic way that adds onto the already great Returnal combat loop. You still could play Saros exactly like Returnal if you want to, but engaging with the additions to the sandbox make the game a lot more fun. I love the addition of the shield and heavy weapon and use both of them often. I found myself a lot more engaged here in Saros than I ever was in Returnal, and all it took were a few different orb colors and a heavy weapon. I think the addition of a more mechanically complex combat system really helped solve a big issue from Returnal, which were the alpha enemies. Alpha enemies in Returnal were bigger enemies that would hit much harder and move much faster than normal. In the last area, I actually found them to be much tougher than all the bosses because just 1 to 2 hits from them could remove most of my health. They felt a bit like cheap difficulty spikes to me more than anything. Alpha enemies here in Saros are still bigger, stronger, and faster, but most of the difficulty comes from harder and more persistent bullet patterns rather than anything else. They are still a great challenge without the unfairness that was occasionally found in Returnal. I also like the slight tweak Saros has made to weapon design. Returnal had a huge problem with weapons that were just not suitable in many situations. A prime example were shotguns, which would just not at all be useful in many boss fights due to how far away the boss was from the player. Here in Saros, the weapon pool is a lot more limited, but much more useful in my opinion. There's 5 different weapon types, which each having different subtypes and mods. I actually found each weapon type, including the shotgun, to be useful most of the time. Bosses are usually much closer to the player now, which means each weapon can comfortably get through each boss. Not all of the weapons fit my playstyle for sure, but each of them felt suitable for a certain type of player, instead of the rifle being clearly the best like it was in Returnal. Saros also adds some new damage options, which are the heavy weapons and the overdrive ability. The heavy weapons are directly related to the shield move, which I think is great and over the course of the game can be upgraded with the command stat. The overdrive ability is another fantastic addition in my opinion, which is essentially the Nova Bomb Super from Destiny. This ability is directly charged based on damage output, meaning the player is incentivized to kill every enemy they see rather than just running past them. This also gives players a crutch to lean on during harder combat encounters and even bosses, where I was able to get the ability 2 to 3 times per boss near the end of the game. Both of these changes are once again a fantastic addition to this game. I just love Saros' combat so much. It takes exactly what worked in Returnal and just makes it so much better. Somehow they were able to add so much and yet still have it all connect together. No single thing here feels out of place and they all work together perfectly to create a system of player choice and risk and reward that just works. The last thing I want to point out that shows just how deeply these devs understand player choice are health pickups. When at full health, you can still pick up Aether, which will grant Lucenite instead. Lucenite is directly related to the upgrade economy and proficiency, which means you want as much of it as you can get. It adds a great little choice where the player has to decide if they want to pick up the Aether for Lucenite or save it for later in case they need more health. Housemarque really gets how important player choice is to a gameplay system, and they implement it all over Saros' gameplay loop. I do think Saros does have one big change from Returnal that I'm not quite fully sure is an improvement, which is how the game handles progression. Saros adds a skill tree that will give the player permanent upgrades that they can buy with Lucenite. No permanent progression was actually a huge issue that I had in Returnal because I felt like I wasn't really working towards anything in that game. The skill tree completely fixes that issue here. The thing is that by adding permanent progression, they almost entirely remove progression that happens during a run. One of my favorite parts of Returnal was how you would slowly get stronger and stronger over the course of the game, being able to craft a build based on what items you found during a run. Thankfully, Saros does keep that here. Over the course of a run, you get access to different guns, heavy weapons, and artifacts. Artifacts are essentially perks, ranging from getting more Lucenite to healing when dealing damage while at low health. During the Eclipse, artifacts will roll with negative perks as well, such as increased dash time and Lucenite lost upon being hit. I really like collecting artifacts over the course of a run, but my issue is that these artifacts don't stay forever. At the end of every biome, you're given the opportunity to go back to the hub area and spend your Lucenite on the skill tree. If you do so, however, all your artifacts will disappear, your stats will reset, and your proficiency will go back down. So essentially, all the progression from your run is reset after every single biome. It is occasionally optional if you want to go back to the hub or not, although other times it's required by the story, yet I think it's a bigger loss if you don't. On death, you lose around half of your Lucenite, and unlike with the rest of the gameplay systems, there's no incentive to not go back to the hub. It's all risk and no reward beyond just keeping all the artifacts you already have and can easily get again. Because of this, I cared a lot less about my build during my runs and would just pick up the same good artifacts over and over. While I like that this game finally added some permanent progression, it moves away from progression happening during gameplay, and I think that's a huge issue. Hopefully with Housemarque's next game, they can find a middle ground between these two extremes. I do want to quickly say, however, I do think this approach does fix one small issue I had with Returnal. In Returnal, I literally did not pick up a single parasite with a negative trait since my choices had a lot more weight to them. If I picked up something bad, then I would have to deal with it for the rest of the game or until I died, and I just wasn't willing to take that risk. Since I knew artifacts reset after each biome here in Saros, I was a lot more willing to experiment with things I otherwise wouldn't and take more risks. I think that perfectly sums up Saros as a whole for me actually. The game is designed with that very fact in mind and does everything it can to make this game more approachable for more people. Returnal was certainly not something that everyone could get into because so many of its game systems would push people away. Its fast-paced combat, unforgiving consequences upon death, and no permanent upgrades all push people away, myself included, which is why I waited so long to actually play it. This is the number one thing that Saros changes from Returnal, and I'm all for it. Now, to be honest, I personally did not find Returnal to be very hard at all. I died twice during my playthrough, once in the scripted opening sequence, and once about 30 minutes into my first run. To be fair, I did play the game entirely on mouse and keyboard, which is going to make the game much easier, of course, but still, I didn't find anything about it too challenging. Despite that, I still had this constant sense of dread about dying. If I were to, I would lose occasionally hours of progress due to the game's lack of checkpoints. This is the first thing that Saros fixes. In Saros, you can restart any biome right from the start of a run without having to replay any of the other ones beforehand if you don't want to. On top of that, you keep most of your Lucenite after death and are able to use it to buy permanent upgrades that will make you marginally better and maybe be just enough to clear a boss. Because of that, I had no anxiety about dying. I actually think these two things are the perfect cushion for less skilled players to fall back on because you are essentially never wasting time. You're always collecting Lucenite to spend on permanent upgrades, and you're always able to try a hard biome over again. What I like most about the skill tree is that it's gated based on bosses. So for example, you can only unlock a certain amount of skills in the skill tree based on the highest boss you've cleared. For example, if you get stuck on the second boss, you can only unlock all the skills that are before its node in the skill tree. This means that while players can essentially just grind Lucenite to fill out the skill tree, they do also have to improve their skill at least a little bit to get to the next area and part of the skill tree. Thankfully, most of the skills in the skill tree are just enough to help the player do just that. They range from small stat upgrades to big ability upgrades. The second chance ability is a notable one that is another great addition and fantastic cushion players can fall back on. After beating the second area, the player also unlocks the Carcosan modifier system, which is another great feature. In Returnal, I wish that the game had some sort of difficulty options as it led to situations where the game had to be balanced around a certain type of player. Because of this, players like myself found the game too easy, however only slightly for me, I'm not that good, and too hard for less skilled players. The modifier system will let players adjust the difficulty by selecting different modifiers, either making the game easier or harder, and finding a combination that works just right for them. Each modifier has a different weight to it, and in order to lock them in, they need to be balanced in the middle. I think that's a great idea because it doesn't let players cheat and make the game too easy. If they were able to do so, then players wouldn't be given a reason to engage with the great combat systems. Despite this, you can actually only select the difficulty modifiers and still lock them in if you choose, which is great for those who want a more difficult experience. I think this modifier system is the perfect solution to difficulty options, and I'm glad to see it included here in this game. I didn't need to make the game any harder for myself this time around, however, because I actually found Saros to be slightly harder than Returnal, dying 9 times according to the in-game tracker. I think this is for a few reasons. First, Saros is a much more complicated game mechanically than Returnal was, with all the orbs, the shield, and the parry. Because of that, the learning curve for this game is going to be a lot greater. Second, like I said earlier, the skill tree doesn't unlock until the end of the first area, and the modifiers don't unlock until the end of the second. I got stuck on the second area's boss, dying maybe 4 to 5 times before actually beating it. This is actually one of the small issues I have with this game's accessibility features. I don't understand why the game is locking them behind completion of areas, as even the first biome may be too difficult for some. I was getting plenty frustrated with having to play the second area over and over again, taking about 25 minutes per run maybe, just to get to the boss and die when it had only half of its last health bar left, which happened literally every time, by the way. I personally would have loved to have the modifier system active at the time, although I am glad I was able to beat it without it. The final reason why I found Saros to be harder was because I played it on a controller instead of on mouse and keyboard like I did with Returnal. I really do not like to play fast-paced shooting games like this on a controller because it's just so hard to aim with the stick and slow-moving camera. I found myself comparing this game to playing something like Doom Eternal on a controller. You can certainly do it, but it's definitely not the best way to play. I think I was just thinking that because I was frustrated from having to do the second area and its boss over and over again though, which is the hardest boss in the game in my opinion by the way, because upon playing more, I actually found the opposite to be the case. Saros is clearly designed with controller in mind. The adaptive triggers and haptic feedback are fully utilized while playing the game. The biggest thing that this game does, however, is that some guns will literally aim for you. I found that 3 guns in the game, 2 of which were rifles, were able to auto-aim, and honestly, this is what carried me through the game. All I had to do was look in the general direction of an enemy, and the game would do the rest itself. Most of the guns don't have this feature and may be better because of it, but I just love how just a few weapons have this option. To me, this feature feels like it was specifically designed with players like myself in mind, those who do not typically use controllers, and I'm thankful that a feature like this is included. Saros is a game that honestly makes Returnal look like a first draft. It took what worked and added onto it and then changed what didn't. The story is much more ambitious with great ideas in art direction, more cutscenes and character interactions, and a better approach to roguelike storytelling. The gameplay is much more mechanically dense with multiple types of orbs, many more abilities, and even a new type of weapon, the heavy weapon. Finally, the game is much more accessible, letting even more people experience the game than ever before. I don't think Saros is a perfect game by any means though. The story is still a bit too vague for my liking and doesn't fully capitalize on its great ideas. The gameplay also unfortunately moves away from progression during runs, more so into permanent progression, which is strange since everything else in this game stays so true to Returnal's original approach. I truly hope with Housemarque's next game they can improve upon this formula even more, perfecting the gameplay and having an even better story. Despite this, Saros is still a fantastic game that now hopefully will not scare as many people away as the first game did. If you liked Returnal, then you're going to love Saros. I recommend Saros, 8 out of 10. Well, y'all, that's my review of Saros. If you like this video, please make sure to like, comment, or even subscribe. Please also make sure to check out my TikTok at goodusername011. That's all I have for today, but I do want to take the last few moments to talk about me and my channel. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about is this script. So when I was playing Saros, I wasn't really I was having a hard time thinking of like an angle I wanted to write about, right? And then I just started writing and it was going fine, I guess. And I got to the story section and it just wasn't coming together. So it's really hard to write about stories like in a non-spoiler way because I just can't use any specific examples. And like with this game especially, like it's so hard to talk about the story because it's like I just can't talk about most of it. Like I can't even mention it, you know? So it was hard, but I actually I did something I don't usually do, which is while I was writing, I went back and just completely changed like my approach with the story section. And in the end, I think this script turned out really good. Like I'm actually really proud of it. But unfortunately, I feel like I did a terrible job with my voiceover today. Like I thought it was getting better. Like my mouse PI video, I love that video. I think it's a fantastic video and I think I did a great job with my voiceover. Today, I don't know. I feel like I did terribly. Like maybe it's just because it's like every time I restart, that like adds to my brain and I'm not going to include that in the video obviously, so the final product usually turns out better than I think it will. But I don't know, like maybe I'm just like overthinking it, but it's like I have some mistakes where it's like I'll be talking and then I'll just like ruin my flow. Like I'll be like, oh, and then this, like, you know what I mean? Like that's what will happen. And it's like it's not a big deal, but it's also like I shouldn't be doing it. But I don't want to re-record an entire thing just because of that, because it's like, it's hot in here, you know what I mean? So, I don't know. I'm just really upset with myself and embarrassed about the voiceover, but we'll see. I mean, I think this is a great script. Good script, right? Whatever. So, what do I want to talk about today other than that? Well, I was finally able to get back to Crimson Desert. So it's been a month and a half since I played it, and thankfully today I was able to get back to it. I'm on chapter 5 now. I was able to complete chapter 4 today. And I don't actually have to make another video until Lego Batman 4, which comes out May 19th, since I did get the early access. Yay! But yeah, so that's the next thing, right? So I actually may be able to beat Crimson Desert and make a video on it, right? But I was playing it today and I was like, do I even want to make a video on this, you know? So honestly, I don't know at this point. Maybe, probably, but I don't know. So I'm definitely going to beat it, but I might not make a video on it. But yeah, I just wanted to include that. So my next video is probably going to be Lego Batman 4, unless, like I said, I decide to make a Crimson Desert video and I beat it before Lego Batman. But yeah, probably going to be that. So I'm probably not going to upload a video for like 2 weeks. I might decide to make some like smaller video. I have a bunch of pre-made scripts, so I might make one of those. But we'll see. But yeah, I just want to say like might be a bit of a gap, but that's just because I'm catching up on other stuff. So yeah, and of course I have to mention it, internship, June 1st, you know, that could impact videos. So, you know, like I've always been saying, if I don't upload a video by then whatever. But yeah, just gotta say that because it's coming up. So yeah, hopefully I'll see y'all soon with Lego Batman, hopefully just a few days after that comes out, and before I go to New York. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Not for my internship, purification, by the way. I wish I got a internship in New York. But yeah, I'll see y'all later. Hopefully I can get 1 to 2 videos out this month, but we'll see. Thanks for watching, y'all. Thanks for keeping up with me, and I hope y'all have a good rest of your day. So yeah, thanks for watching, y'all. Bye!